Support for Carolina Business Review provided by Grant Thornton. Operating in more than 100 countries, our tax, audit, and advisory professionals specialize in helping companies unlock their growth potential. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of South Carolina, where healthcare is changing for the better. Find out how at ahealthysc.tv. And by Sunoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services, with more than 300 operations in 35 countries.
So what's the old saying about who controls the purse strings controls a nation, an industry, or a household? Well, the smart money in business and in life bet on the person that manages the finances. Happy summer and welcome to the most widely watched and the longest running source of Carolina business and public policy discussion. I am Chris William, and it is often understood that if you want the factual, unvarnished situation of an organization, talk to the CFO. Well, this time on CBR, that is exactly what we do. And Lloyd from Marietta and Steve Young from Duke Energy join us.
Major funding also by Novant Health, bringing you world-class technology, clinicians, and care when and where you need it. The Duke Endowment, a private foundation enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, healthcare, rural churches, and children's services. And by Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina. Who's responsible for rising healthcare costs? Join us and many others in a candid discussion at letstalkcost.com. On this edition of Carolina Business Review, Ann Lloyd, Executive Vice President and Chief Financial Officer of Martin Marietta, and Steve Young, Executive Vice President and Chief Financial Officer of Duke Energy.
That's the issue.
Hello, welcome to our program. And as you can tell, we always have these great dialogues right before the cameras come on and the lights come up, so we're going to keep it going. Ann, Steve, welcome. Good to have you both here.
Thank you.
But, let's talk about this idea that here we are in the 6th year of an economic expansion, and many people still refer to it as a recovery. In other words, it's almost a tentative, we're going to wait and see what happens. Hard to argue that we've had really 6 years of decent growth now. And when you look at not just Martin Marietta's balance sheet, but talk to some of your customers and clients, and you look over kind of the region, do you feel that this is a tentative recovery?
I don't think it's tentative today. I do think it has been slow to come. If you look at our business as a whole, we're only about 30% off the bottom. So we lost about 80 million tons of demand, and we are only up about 25. So it's just taken a long time, and it's been slow, particularly west to east. If you go west of the Mississippi River, those markets have recovered faster, but as we've come into the southeastern markets, they've been a little bit slower, really late last year, or late 14 into 15, and now really starting to see stronger growth.
So if you're 30% off of what the low was after 08, 09, or right in that area, does that mean that you still got 70% to go?
That's exactly what it means.
Really?
But we're not sure we'll get back to that 70%.
In this cycle?
In this cycle, correct.
Steve, what do you think?
We have seen similar patterns that Ann discussed. It's not quite as extreme. In 08 and 09, we lost a lot of our industrial load in our service territories, which are in the Midwest and Carolinas and Florida. We've recovered about 90% of that over this long period of time. And it is seeing global challenges now with the strength of the U.S. dollar. But it does feel very slow, and perhaps it's a product of how far we fell in 08 and 09 as well.
Does Brexit, a few weeks ago, I had Brexit, and everyone thought that the sky was falling, and turns out it was maybe one of the best stimulus for at least the equity markets domestically. Does Brexit at all play into how you model out now, or pro forma, any of your business?
For us, not so much. I think Brexit, to me, was, for Martin Marietta, a definition of what uncertainty in the markets does, because the activity in the equity markets that day, obviously the bet was that the UK would remain in the EU. Yeah. And when they came out, the markets crashed. We didn't. We actually held tight. But for us, it's more the who we compete with. We're typically a domestic company. Most of our competitors, though, are global materials companies. So the impact on them in the European markets and what they have to do to invest their capital and allocate it there, really that's the effect it has on us in the U.S., not so much directly.
Yeah, Steve?
Same thing here. Those types of uncertainties will typically drive investors to investments like Duke Energy.
So we seen as a safe haven.
A safe haven, absolutely. But when you think about our customers and what they felt, the industrial customers particularly in our service territories, not a significant problem at this point in time is what we've heard.
Yeah. So just kind of sew up this first little part of the dialogue we're having. When you look out the next, I don't know, 12, 18 months, 5 years, do you expect that we are going to see another slowdown before you get that opportunity to ramp back up to where you were in the high water mark?
As we look over the next cycle, our view is for our business, the next cycle really perhaps peaks in 2019 or 2020. So we do see continued slow growth in the construction sector across the U.S., at least in those markets where there's high population growth or high population density. And a lot of that, Chris, has been driven by, for the first time in a decade, the federal government approved a multi-year highway bill last December, for the first time in 10 years. And then you've got the states, North Carolina, Georgia, Virginia, Texas, who are investing their own money into transportation to serve as economic development platform. And as those states continue to invest, that money really is only newly coming into the system. So just from the public spending, we think that we'll see another 3-4 years of nice activity before we peak out. We won't reach where we were in the prior peak. That's not our expectation.
Do you think 36, 42 months? You think that's is that the way you look at the world?
You know, in terms of the forecasting that we do of our customer base, we see a couple of dynamics. The construction materials businesses in the Carolinas have been doing pretty well. We see that continuing. Automotive, which is in the Carolinas and our Midwest jurisdictions, has been strong with the low gasoline prices. Some of our primary metals groups, however, have been affected by the global economy, the strength of the U.S. dollar. So they have softened a bit there. So again, we look at it industry by industry. Overall, we're continuing to see growth. It'll move around between industries, but over the next 3 to 5 years, we still see some growth in our areas.
So let's spend a couple minutes tweezing out this analysis, and that you kind of put a stake in the ground around transportation. I don't know that there could be a more acute debate going on around transportation. Departments of transportation in North and South Carolina, what they're doing with their funds, what communities need it. Steve, I think Duke Energy has been referred to as an economic development company more than anything else, almost, than a community planning company. But but your product obviously goes right to transportation. Even more than that, when you look at some of the debate that goes on in the Triangle, around the Triangle Transit Plan, in Charlotte, in places like Charleston. You said something I thought that was pretty neat right before the show. You said these are high-class problems to have, but nonetheless, we've got to get through this. How do you think, are we approaching the debate around transportation the right way?
You know, I don't believe so, because I think we're looking at it as a cost versus an investment. And if you look at those states in the United States who are investing in their public transportation, whether that be roads, streets, bridges, light rail, electrical utility, water infrastructure, broadband infrastructure, those states are viewing their transportation dollar as an investment. They're doing that to invest for the people that are there and the people that are coming. I mean, our product is basically population driven. It's a per capita consumption model. And if you would focus on transportation dollars as an investment for the future growth of an area, I think you'll have a more productive debate as opposed to it's a tax or a cost.
So it ends up being a political hot potato in places like Charlotte on the I-77
Right.
corridor. So Steve, what is Duke's responsibility? What is your responsibility when it comes to shepherding or convening a debate that's not so hot, that's more intellectual and more practical?
Oh, I think it's Duke's responsibility to participate in these things.
But folks will say, Steve, yeah, but that's, Martin Marietta and
Yeah,
Duke, they're big companies. They don't
I agree
really...
with you, Chris, but let's look what the business community did in North Carolina. The business community got together and took on an issue that was not popular, which is raising transportation dollars for the state of North Carolina. And it polled awfully. I mean, ask anybody, do you want to pay more for the roads that you ride on? Absolutely not.
Yeah.
And that's the answer. But the business community got together and raised enough money to go out to campaign with the general public, with the General Assembly, about how important investment is. And we got another $1 billion too. And that to me is the business community's job. Now, yes, Martin Marietta and Duke are going to benefit from that investment. I agree, but the whole state of North Carolina is going to benefit from that investment.
Yeah, Steve, I cut you off. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, Ann is absolutely correct. This is an investment in the future for the state. We have to upgrade the infrastructure in the state, whether it's ports, airports, water ports, highways, public transportation. That enables and facilitates growth, better jobs, better education, just a better lifestyle. And it is not a tax or a cost. It's got to be kept up and improved.
Do you think that and it's just going to say, well, you're going on record to some degree here. Would business be willing to help, maybe not necessarily stroke a check for it, but somehow if business could get together around transportation with one unified voice? It was a very hotly debated issue in the South Carolina General Assembly. It continues to run in the background in North Carolina. But as you said, Ann, if business can congregate and convene around this issue, can that happen?
It can. I think it did in North Carolina. And if you look at the stats, in South Carolina, I think 80% of the funding in South Carolina for transportation comes from the federal government. Contrast that with North Carolina, where it's, I think, 48%. So it's almost half and half. Go out to Texas, Colorado, that's half and half. Those are states that have invested, and we're starting to catch up with those to match that federal dollar. I think dependence on that federal dollar could get really dangerous.
Steve?
Oh, I agree. And I think businesses can come together, coalesce ideas and stakeholders, and it's a great forum to come up with efficient ideas that can help manage the varying views of the different constituencies very effectively. We've done it in the past in various economic development projects throughout the Carolinas, and it's a great way to bring people together on common ideas. So it's a very useful tool.
Well, and Steve and I have a lot of employees who live in this state.
Absolutely.
And want to have a high quality of life. And to me, that's part of that investment profile.
You talk about investment, capital investment. Your job, to some degree, is figuring out how to best to deploy allocate your capital. Capital investment going forward, where do you think the best return on the money that you want to allocate? Where is that for you?
For Duke at a utility, we're investing in infrastructure all the time. We spend about $7 billion a year in capital investments across our utilities. We're building power plants to provide energy, but the area of investment that I'm excited about is another form of infrastructure, the electric energy grid. Storm-hardened equipment, meters that can communicate with customers. The grid investment is a really exciting area in our business.
Do you ever worry about the privacy issues around those meters that can speak back and, folks say, well, wait a minute, I don't even know if I want to share my birth date with anyone, let alone all this information.
We have dealt with that, and certainly there are some customers that would rather not have that form of communication. I think by far most of our customers see the value that can be provided. Knowing when an outage is occurring, and faster response time in those circumstances, ability to communicate when an outage will be repaired, ability to have different billing options that come with these types of investments, I think far outweigh the privacy issues, and I think we can find solutions to satisfy people on that front as well.
How about CapEx for you?
Our capital is very similar in the fact that we're really reinvesting in our existing plant. For us, the average quarry size is about 1 million tons. You don't see a lot of new quarries opening up, just like you don't see a lot of new power plants opening up, right? And so for us, it's recapitalizing a lot of the iron, particularly in the states of North and South Carolina. A lot of our plants are wonderfully vintage aged, kind of that late 50s, early 60s.
That's a nice
very
way to say it.
vintage age for this table, right? So we're going in and recapitalizing. So for us, it's really about cost efficiency, because you sell a ton of rock on average for $12. So you have to produce it, and your cost has to be really effective and efficient. So we'll reinvest into the plants to improve automation. I mean, think about taking a 1960s vintage plant and putting a new one in today. The automation's much different today than it was then. So we're looking at cost reduction is the way we do it.
You both live in markets that are very hot in growth. As a matter of fact, if you took a survey, and a very informal anecdotal survey across the Carolinas, and just counted the number of cranes in the air that are raising buildings and other structures, do you ever worry that we get out over the tips of our skis on this commercial development that's going on?
Oh, certainly we do. You see it in Charlotte with the apartment building booms that are going on, and you wonder, is this going to be too much capacity? Are we getting too quickly, too fast, as was done in the 06 time frame? And I think that that's something to be concerned with. I think the urban areas are seeing a lot of good growth. The rural areas, though, are lagging behind a bit. But certainly the urban areas in the Carolinas, and we serve some jurisdictions in Florida, in the St. Pete area, we're starting to see some very good growth there. I think hopefully it will be tempered a bit and managed a bit based on the knowledge we got in the last go-round, the problems we had in 08 and 09.
Is there a way for you to financially buy a put on that kind of growth to protect your downside? Not to get too technical here, but I mean, how do you manage that liability, Steve?
Well, you have to do a lot of scenario and long-range planning, and our business, particularly the utility business, does a lot of that. What if the growth moves differently? What if commodity prices change? What is going to be our response here? And so we do the long-term planning that leaves us with adjustment procedures in place where we can ramp back things or change other activities. So that helps us deal with these ups and downs in the economy.
And we're a cyclical business, right? And so,
and you know that about
the one thing that we know that we can't control is the volume, right? That is the lever that is controlled by the marketplace. So what we do long-range planning ourselves. We look at 5-year cycles, but you're really looking at 20-year plans for a mine that's going to last 100 years. So for us, it's really spending a lot of time understanding that you control your controllables, right? I think if there's one thing businesses like is certainty. Now that's
risk management,
a little problem. It's a lot of uncertainty out there, I think, over the next few months. But for us, that's the way we're looking at it.
We all probably read the same things, look for the same, if you will, canary in the coal mine about the economy and about business and so on and so forth. And the Fed has come under a lot of pressure about managing this expansion, what we do in the next cycle, what's the Fed going to do about interest rates. The other side of that coin is fiscal policy, and that is what Congress should be doing in many cases and is not doing in many cases. And do you think there is a tipping point where Congress will have to act to know that monetary policy is not the only tool and can't just do what we need done?
There should be, but I go back to my comment on the federal highway bill. It took 10 years for the Congress to act on something that's in the best interest of the entire United States, and to look at, what predecessors before us in the Eisenhower administration did to build the interstate highway system. It took them 10 years to do something like that. I think it's something they should do. I don't see the political will for it to happen.
Is it just the lack of political decorum that's keeping us from doing some of these things? Is it the separation between the parties?
I certainly think that's part of it. The partisanship and the dysfunction between the parties makes it difficult to have compromise and coalition around an admission that, hey, there's a good idea from the other side. Let's move forward. I think the atmosphere is not conducive to having these types of changes made.
But that's the thing, Steve, and I do every day, right? It's all about building the coalitions within your own organization, building the coalitions with the banking community, with the Wall Street community to understand what's going on in your business, how am I going to talk about it, how are we going to get this accomplished. There are very few black and white problems that I deal with every day. I doubt you either. And so it's in some ways it's disheartening to see that the groups can't sit down, have a reasonable debate, and come up with solution. And that's where, again, I think the business community and we as voters can potentially affect that.
Well, then you're going to love this next one, healthcare. How in the world how do you look out, and to use your term, Ann, how do you risk control or model out the cost of health care within the organization, and especially since the rate of growth has been more than most expect, and some insurers are even closing down lines of business because it's not what they thought it was going to be?
Well, I mean, a lot of us, and I'm sure Steve the same way, self-insure a good portion of what we do. But we saw health care as a real issue 10, 15 years ago. And that if we didn't begin to turn our employees into consumers of health care, as opposed to a true consumer, as opposed to just a user, that we were going to have long-term trends and challenges that we weren't going to be able to keep up with. So if I look back at the rate of growth in our healthcare costs over the past 10 years, it's 4%. I can manage 4%, but that's been done through a series of, trying to drive behavior through incentive or disincentive, as the case may be, a different cost-sharing model. So for us, we've been thinking about it for a long time and have been able to control that as we move forward today.
Are you going to be able to keep single-digit growth like 4% in the next couple of years?
I sure hope so, but it gets harder and harder to make changes to your health program.
Right, it's very difficult, and the health of our 28,000 employees at Duke is very important to us. They're the engine that drives the company. But when you look at prescription drugs and healthcare costs with the annual increases that they've seen over 15, 20 years, we've had to institute a lot of programs and a lot of educational programs to get the employee invested in this as well. So we have wellness programs where if you can visit doctors and undertake certain practices, that can lower the premiums. We try to tailor programs and subsidies to programs more efficiently, but we've got to get the employees invested in here, and that's been step one. It's worked for us. But the trends continue to move in that direction of these increases.
So do you've got payers and you've got providers, and they both point fingers at one another and say, well, if the payer did this, then we'd be able, as a provider, as a hospital, we can do this, and it's vice versa. As a business, what would you say to both of those to say, look, just get along, or just do this, or just do that? I mean, what is that? Is there a magic formula here that we're missing? Because there are egos involved to some degree? And oh, by the way, you got a minute to answer this question.
There is no magic answer.
No.
We can both agree on that,
no,
right?
we have battled back with payers and providers and negotiated up to the last minute in circumstances. There's no magic bullet here. But again, you have to work to find common ground, to compromise the types of things Ann discussed. We've generally ultimately had success, but it requires a lot of resource and attention.
Will Congress have to edit what these programs ultimately look like? Will they have to go back and retool Obamacare? Do you think they should do it?
Well, I think they should. I think there are benefits that can be looked at probably under any program of this magnitude. As you move down the road, you learn things, and I don't think we should be afraid to try to pursue beneficial changes in a program of this nature. And I think President Obama has recently even alluded to some potential changes that may be beneficial.
Yeah, okay. Well, folks, both of you, thank you so much, Steve and And you got off light here. We didn't even talk about HB2, but we're going to give you a fair warning next time. We're probably going to bring up something like that. Thank you for being a guest on our program. Good to see you both, and thanks for your leadership.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Until next week, I'm Chris William. Hope your weekend is good. Good night.
Major funding for Carolina Business Review was provided by the Duke Endowment, a private foundation enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, healthcare, rural churches, and children's services. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina. Who's responsible for rising healthcare costs? Join us and many others in a candid discussion at letstalkcost.com. Grant Thornton. Operating in more than 100 countries, our tax, audit, and advisory professionals specialize in helping companies unlock their growth potential. Novant Health, bringing you world-class technology, clinicians, and care when and where you need it. Sunoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services with more than 300 operations in 35 countries. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of South Carolina, where healthcare is changing for the better. Find out how at ahealthysc.tv. And by viewers like you. Thank you. Promotional consideration provided by Business North Carolina Magazine. For more information, visit carolinabusinessreview.org.